You won't find a brave little pink dog to save you out here in the middle of nowhere, and courage is the last thing you'll feel. The following stories take place in different isolated, secluded, or lonesome areas that are familiar yet terrifying. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary middle-of-nowhere encounters, and be sure to send me your stories at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear stories about small towns. Make sure to follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes, and review it on iTunes too, if you prefer to listen while you work, drive, or sleep. Thank you. Now, let's begin. It's Not My Brother. From Michael C. It was a cold and snowy night in the outskirts of the small town of Taos, New Mexico. I was lying in my bed with my dog, getting ready to go to sleep. It was around 12 a.m. when I finally turned off the TV, laying my cell phone down. Now, my room was originally a garage my dad and I had converted into my bedroom, which is separated from the rest of the house. I could very well feel the wind in the garage coming in from the outside, so I bundled up under my blankets and fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of someone at my door trying to open it. I reminded myself that I did indeed lock the deadbolt, but still, I began to look for my phone so I could turn the light on before getting up out of bed. I quickly found my phone, but before I could turn it on or get up, I hear the door open. I should add that the way the bed was situated, I was facing away from the door. So when the door opened, I could not see who was there. Not until they spoke. I lay there, thinking that I must have dreamt the door opening, because I didn't hear anyone come in. But then, from the foot of my bed, I hear it. "Hey, brother, your door was locked." "That's okay. I'm in now." It was the voice of my little brother, who at the time of this event was 13. I was 27. I don't move an inch, trying to think how he got in my room without the keys. Why was he even awake at this time? I reminded myself if someone was there, my dog Lotus would wag his tail as he always does. A few seconds pass, and I feel the wag of Lotus's tail start. "Look at me, brother," the voice says. I still don't move or say anything. I'm doing my best to act like I'm asleep. All I can really do is lie there, wondering what this thing is, standing at my feet, pretending to be my little brother. It goes quiet again. No, I must have been dreaming, must have had a nightmare, I tell myself. I feel a slump in my bed on both sides of my feet. I reach down to the ground and grab my shotgun. But then I'm reminded, I can't do that. What if it is my brother? But why is he in here right now? The thoughts race through my mind. "I know you're not sleeping, brother. Why won't you look at me?" The voice comes again, sounding a bit deeper than my brother this time. "Fine, be that way," the voice says, as it heads over to the door, opening it once more, but without closing it all the way. I feel Lotus slowly stop wagging his tail and sit up. I'm too terrified to move. Finally, after what felt like an hour of just lying there, I find my remote, turn on the TV, and I wait to see if I hear anything else other than the TV. I sat up in bed trying to justify it as sleep paralysis, because I have had that before. I stand up and do a sweep of my door, and nothing seems off. except that the door is still open. I walk over to it and open it. It's still snowing outside, but not that hard. But then I see it. There are wet footprints leading up to my bed, but not leaving, and the fresher snow outside my door is undisturbed. I shut the door, lock the deadbolt, and stay up for the rest of the night, TV on and gun in hand. The normal flat tire, from 18 Wheels Hummin'. I used to drive coast to coast in an old Peterbilt. At the time of this experience, it was probably midnight. I was driving through Iowa, and my destination was somewhere near a town called Clinton in Iowa. I think I was going about 75 miles per hour on a 2-lane road, when suddenly I felt my back tire blow out. As with any flat I'd had, I pulled over. I immediately took notice of my surroundings. I was at the side of the road, near a very wooded place, and it was quite dark. The only lights I could see were mine and the occasional car that passed by. I walked over to my tire with the new one, only to see that the tire wasn't just flat, it had been sliced open as I was driving. That's weird. I decided to look around for the culprit, the thing that had cut my tire. I must have walked a few feet away from the trailer, closer toward the woods, when I heard my truck shift into gear without me. I went running full speed towards my truck. I noticed a figure in the cab. I threw open the passenger side door, only to see that no one was there. I jumped into the passenger seat and put the thing back into park, wondering what the heck just happened. I decided I needed to get some rest because I felt like I was going crazy. I locked up the cabin and fell asleep for about an hour before I suddenly heard another tire on my rig blow out. Heart pounding in my chest, I grabbed my grandpa's old rifle, then jumped out of the cab. The moment I landed on the ground and looked toward the back of the truck, I saw a figure running away into the woods. Something or someone was trying to sabotage my truck, but for what purpose? At that point, I was scared to death. I got back in the semi and drove off, which wasn't very safe considering the tires. But at the first gas station I saw, I got out and changed the tires myself. Then I fell asleep for a while. About a month later, I quit driving a semi, and even still that incident creeps me out. So now, I just enjoy watching the trucks drive past my house. Was it the Michigan Dog Man? From Sarah H. I ride horses at a barn in Michigan, along with some of my really good friends. The following story is an encounter my friend Jay had. One late evening at the barn, Jay finished up riding and taking care of his horse, so he began to set off for the night. Now, our barn rests on an extensive string of dirt roads surrounded by mostly forest. It's quite desolate, and there's an eerie feeling to it after it gets dark. So Jay leaves the barn and turns his beloved Jeep onto the first small dirt road leading away from the barn. As his headlights meet the road, they illuminate what appears to be a large dog right in the middle of the road. Jay figured the dog belonged to a farmer in the area and decided to not approach the animal, but to rather flick it with his high beams in hopes that it would get the hint, then move along off the road. But the dog-like creature turns its head in Jay's direction. Jay notices it's hunched over an unidentifiable animal on the road, eating it. The canine-like creature proceeds to get up and begins to run into the woods, like a man, on his hind legs. Jay, in shock, speeds the heck out of there. It's a short story, and I wish I could give more information. But for me, knowing there is a bipedal dog creature roaming right near where our horses sleep, it's enough to give me the creeps at night. After hearing this story, and seeing the absolute truth in his face when he tells it, I am afraid to be at the barn alone after dark. I hope to never meet the Michigan Dog Man myself. Satanic Cop and Something in the Window, from Heartfelt 87. I'm a 33-year-old woman and an eclectic pagan, yet the story I'm about to share with you still makes me raise an eyebrow. I've seen my fair share of paranormal happenings. This story takes place in 2005 when I was only 18 years old in central Indiana, about an hour north of Indianapolis. It's a whole lot of corn and soybean fields. Anyway, this involves me and 4 other people, 1 other young woman and 3 fellas. It was a boring summer weekday evening, and we were in the apartment just babbling about nothing when we got on the subject of local haunted places. One place we discussed was the Satanic Church, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and as we later realized, 1 county over. The story goes that supposedly in the late 1800s or early 1900s, a cult took over the church and killed the parishioners one day. No clue if that's actually true or not, but that's the story we heard. The church is small, about that old, and it's one of those that actually has a cemetery on the property, just to add to the creepy factor. Well, the lot of us being 18 to 20 years old and bored out of our minds, we decided to go on a little road trip out to the church. We all piled into our lady friend's little Chevy Beretta, and we headed out. Mind you, she's the only one that actually knows where we're going. So the other girl is driving. 1 guy is in the front passenger seat. I'm in the back behind the driver, and the other 2 guys are in the back with me. We drive for about half an hour in the country and then down a gravel road before we make it to the church, which is on a gravel road across from a cornfield with the church on the driver's side of the car. By then, it's well after midnight. We were apparently the only car on the road since we left town, and the road we were on was so narrow, only 1 vehicle could drive down it at any given time. Now, we've all seen our fair share of horror movies to know better than to actually get out of the car, so we sit there with the windows rolled down, staring at this church. In one window at the bottom left, nearest the graveyard, is a faint translucent bluish-gray figure. It appeared like some smoke decided to try to become corporeal. It was in the shape of a person. It was for the most part androgynous. I squinted really hard. Then I said, "Do you guys all see that thing in the window there?" Everyone saw it, all 5 of us. As we stared, transfixed on the church, I started to see shadows moving in the graveyard. I know at least the other girl with us saw it too. The next thing we knew, we were all blinded by glaring lights. There was a truck with floodlights that had pulled up in front of us. We all gahed and acked in the sudden light. Then, out of the truck, steps a man in a county sheriff's uniform. Not the county we're from, but the next one over. I didn't realize we were that far out. He comes up to the car and starts asking the usual questions, all the while shining a flashlight in each of our faces, like he couldn't already see us well enough with the lights on his big ol' yee-yee truck. Now, it's important that I reiterate that we're on a narrow, 1-lane gravel road, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, with absolutely no other traffic from anywhere. And when the guy in the sheriff's uniform came up to the car, he went over to the passenger window for some reason. By doing this, he made the driver have to reach over the passenger to hand him her information. He was a young guy, I'd say early 20s. If you've ever been pulled over, then you know that it is not the proper way to do that. I understand that sometimes the officer will go to the passenger side on a busy road for safety reasons. But again, it was a gravel road in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. The man asks us all to get out of the car to perform a vehicle search. We comply, getting out and handing him our IDs. He uses his cell phone to call it in, but he had a radio on his shoulder. I assumed it would be protocol to use the radio. I was sure of it. As we're all just standing there, I look back at the church. That thing, that figure, it's still in the window, and I swear it appeared to be laughing at us. The man lazily searched the car, giving us back our IDs and telling us to just go home. It wasn't until we made it back to the apartment that I realized it. I started to point out everything that the sheriff did wrong. Going to the wrong side of the car, using his cell phone, using a truck that wasn't at all an official police vehicle. It was just a big truck with bright, annoying floodlights attached. I still talk to the other woman that was with us that night, and I brought up this story to her a few months back. She said she thought that she read somewhere that a guy from that county got arrested for parading around in a family member's sheriff's uniform. But I don't remember hearing about anything of the sort. We concluded that the church was definitely haunted, and that guy definitely was not a sheriff. I wish any of us had a phone with video capabilities at the time, so we could have gotten a badge number and a name. But in 2005, that was a commodity. Just remember, kids, if you're ever pulled over or stopped by police of any kind, it is well within your rights to record everything they do, even if they tell you not to. After all, you never know when it might be an imposter. It wasn't an iguana. From Anonymous. When I was 13, I went to visit my family in Mexico. I was having a great time getting to know about the traditions, about the legends they have in the town, and even the scary stories they had, which intrigued me the most. One day I was out in the town with my uncle. A friend of his approached us. He invited my uncle to go night fishing with him, but my uncle said no, as he had to work that night, but he said he might go next time. That night, I was waiting for my uncle at my grandma's house. We planned on going to eat some tacos. He would be getting off around 11 at night, so by the time we went to eat and come back, it was 1 in the morning. A few minutes after we got back, someone knocked at the door. My grandma went to open it. There stood my uncle's friend, standing outside with a pale face and a look of terror. We brought him inside to calm him down. My uncle asked what was going on with him, and why he looked so pale, like he had just seen the dead. The man, in a panic, began to explain that he had gone fishing by himself out at the lake in the wilderness. But the entire night, he wasn't having any luck, so he decided to pack and head back home. He got on his bike and was following the trail that goes around the lake, and while he was looking over at the lake, he started to see a ripple on the water. He saw something preparing to come out of the lake. At first, he thought it was an iguana, but as he got closer to that side of the lake, he noticed it was bigger than that. It came out of the water on all fours, and my uncle's friend noticed that it had scales all over its body. They were very shiny, reflecting the light of the full moon. He noticed then that it had a pointed tail, like a lizard, but much shorter. And while he was getting closer to that side of the lake, the creature heard him and turned around. And then it stood up on 2 legs. He said the creature looked like it was 6 feet tall. It had these big yellow eyes and was just staring at him, following his every movement with that stare. While he passed it by, he decided to go a little faster on the bike he was on so he could get out of there more quickly. After that story, my grandma told us that ever since she was a little girl, she had heard tales about a fisherman that made a deal with the devil, but didn't keep his side of the deal. So he was dragged into the water by the devil himself and was transformed into the creature my uncle's friend saw. They call him El Chavarin. Supposedly, he is responsible for many of the drownings at the lake and all the rivers connected to it. What did I see? From KFOT 93. I'm a long-haul truck driver, so I'm no stranger to the States. I've seen things that I can't explain, but this is by far the weirdest thing to ever happen to me. I was driving through Arizona, heading westbound on I-40. I'd finally hit Flagstaff and got to a truck stop so I could handle my business. As I departed Flagstaff, I ran by mile marker 185. It's about 10 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona. As I passed mile marker 185, there was what seemed to be a person hitchhiking. The only problem was this guy was huge, like 8 feet tall, looking straight into the passenger window of my semi-truck. On top of that, he seemed to be as wide as the truck from shoulder to shoulder. I passed this hitchhiker. About half a mile down the road, I saw the exact same person or thing. Once again, I passed him. But once again, it kept happening, even 20 miles down the road to mile marker 165. I saw him every few miles. After I passed marker 165, I didn't see him anymore. So I thought that was done with. It was over. But I was dead wrong. I got down to mile marker 145, and I had to take a leak, so I pulled over on the side of the road to handle my business. I was about halfway done when I heard an ear-piercing scream, mixed between what sounded like a deer and a human. As soon as I heard it, I jumped and began to look around. Just outside the halo of my headlights, I spotted it. I was never more confused and scared in my life. I tried to figure out what it was when I heard something flying through the air. Suddenly, I heard a thump, thump. Sitting 3 feet away from me was a huge rock the size of a basketball. It must have been 80 pounds. That thing had thrown it at me, and it landed only 3 feet away. I wasted no time trying to hop back in the truck, getting away from whatever that thing was. As I passed it, it just stared me down, and I never saw it again. Can someone tell me what I saw? Creature at Kent's Lake, Utah. From Gallows Calibrator. This happened at Fish Lake National Forest in Utah. There are 3 Kent's Lakes: Upper Kent's Lake, and Lower Kent's Lake. This happened in the middle one. I am no stranger to the paranormal and unknown. I've seen many unexplained occurrences, and I'm pretty sure my house is haunted. But this is a different story. I was camping at the lake with my father and younger sister. It was less than a month ago as of writing this, so the events are still fresh in my mind. Now, we often do go camping, but usually we camp closer to home in Southern California. This campsite was a bit more secluded than we were used to. We often camped with our neighbors as well, whom I get along with. But they were not with us on this trip. After an 8-hour drive to the campsite, my sister and I were starting to argue a lot. The lake was beautiful. We saw a lot of chipmunks, squirrels, and fish, as well as some elk and deer and cows. We even spotted 2 golden eagles. The beauty of the nature there that surrounded us lulled me into a false sense of security. After a particularly nasty fight with my sister, I went off exploring in an attempt to calm myself down. I've struggled with anger issues in the past, something I'm working with my therapist to get better at. I crossed the lake angrily, unaware of my surroundings. I got to the floodgate on the other side of the lake, and I was about to head into the forest when suddenly everything felt wrong. I felt as if someone was there with me, and they didn't want me around. There were no animals or bugs in sight, which was very strange. I contemplated turning back, or at least going back to camp to get a radio, so I could call for help if I needed to. But then I remembered how mad I was at my sister, and as the fury grew again in my mind, the doubt practically disappeared. It seems my anger blinds me from any sense of dread or self-preservation. Still, as I trudged into the thickly wooded forest, I felt myself constantly checking for my throwing knives on my belt, as if somehow they'd disappeared. Eventually, as I kept walking and the feeling got worse, I pulled out one of the knives from its place on my hip. As I gripped the hilt, I wondered how much damage such a small knife could really do. I continued going through, not letting the fear stop me. As I walked through the forest, it was dead silent. Not in the way that a silence fell over the forest, but that I was the only one making a sound since I left the shore of the lake. This, too, was concerning, but I brushed it off, saying my loud footsteps probably scared all the animals away. I came across a gross smell. I stopped in my tracks and I looked around. I could see nothing. Not until I glanced down. A few inches away from my left foot was a dead squirrel. Gross, but still not out of the ordinary. I had to wonder, though, why there were no flies swarming around the dead body. I carefully stepped around it, feeling kind of sad but continuing on. About 10 minutes later, I decided to take a break. I had asthma, and it was getting hard for me to breathe. As I sat still, now completely silent, the woods were too. It was as if someone had just stopped time. I began to feel nauseous, and I thought heading back might be a good idea. I looked over at the seemingly empty forest ahead of me. I noticed a hawk feather. I thought this was really interesting, so I walked over to pick it up. And then I noticed another, and another. There were a lot of these feathers, and then there was the corpse of a hawk. Now I was starting to get really freaked out. I grabbed my knife again, and I booked it out of there. I was almost running, but not quite, because I was in a thickly forested hill. I was almost to the shoreline. I could see it, but then I heard something. The snapping of a branch. The first other sound I'd heard since entering those trees. I froze, then built up courage to turn around slowly. It may have been a deer or elk, but there, sitting on the forest floor, was this thing. I've no idea what it was, but it was dark like a shadow. Its limbs were almost undefined, but they were long and thin. It crawled on 4 legs almost like a giant bug, but quadrupedal. It had white, almost glowing eyes. Those eyes were full of hatred. This thing was big, arms almost as long as my entire body. It seemed to have no facial features besides eyes, no nose or mouth. But it had hands with 5 fingers and filthy blood-stained claws. I ran as fast as I could. I ran out to the shore, too terrified to look back. My lungs were burning, but I didn't stop running until I got back to our campsite. Still, that thing followed me to the tree line, but I don't think it went any further. But it followed me long enough to grab my ankle and as I yanked my foot back, my boots were splashed with blood, and I got a nasty scratch on my ankle to prove it. When I made it back, I didn't tell my dad or sister, in fear that they would not believe my story. Instead, I told them that I'd fallen, and that's how I'd gotten the injury. I have no idea what I saw, but I know it wanted me dead, just like that squirrel and that hawk. I've tried to research it, but I really have no idea where to start. All I know is that I'm never going back to Fish Lake National Forest ever again.